And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
After that, we started hearing loud bangings, consecutive loud bangings out in the hallway. There is a lot of construction that goes on around that building. It has been all semester, and we complained about the noise all semester, but I mean, this one sounded a little different. The teacher was concerned initially, and we said, no, it's just a hammer or something, like they're doing construction, no big deal. And we heard them again. They were louder and they're closer. And then she opened the door, peeked her head out, and shuddered immediately, very terrified, said, everybody get on the ground and call 911.
Good evening, America. Welcome to a very special edition of the Inside Scoop. That was Colin Goddard, who was there, courtesy of Newsweek, NBC, and the Associated Press. All the clips we're going to be playing are from them. You can check them out at msnbc.com. Tonight we're going to devote the entire show to discussing the massacre at Virginia Tech and what can be done to prevent the recurrence of such a tragedy. That's why I'm wearing the special Virginia Tech colors of orange and maroon. Let's go back to Colin Goddard, hear a little bit more about what happened at Virginia Tech, and then I'll introduce my guests.
I called 911 from my telephone, got in contact with them, tried to let them know which building I was in, which room I was in, let them know that there were gunshots in the hallway. During the beginning of this as well, a few students tried to barricade the door with desks, tables, and chairs and whatnot. As for locking the door, I'm not exactly sure if it was locked, but soon after that, I saw bullets coming through the wooden door. Right around where the lock was. I think he was trying to get rid of the lock or something, and then he starts kicking in the door. Okay. And then I see him come into the room from about the shoulders down. That's all I get to see of him. Boots, dark pants, white shirt, double holster over his shoulders for pistols, it looked like. All the students were on the ground, underneath desks, just wherever you could get on the ground. And he started walking down the rows of desks and just shooting people at random. Multiple people, same time. Didn't say a word. Didn't demand anything from us. Didn't request us to get up or do anything like that. Okay. He came around to my side of the room, shot the people sitting around me, and then shot me in the knee. And then he came back into the room a second time.
This is after 10 or 15 minutes he was
About
gone?
10 or 15 minutes, yeah. My concept of time, I'm not exactly sure if it's accurate, but...
Of course.
And then he started walking down the rows of desks again, shooting more people. Came to my side of the room again, shot me twice more, in the shoulder and in the thigh.
Okay.
And then that was one of the last... Then I heard one or two shots after that, and then that was it. And there were no more shots.
That was Colin Goddard, 21-year-old student at Virginia Tech and a victim, of course, in that horror. By now, you of course know what happened at Virginia Tech, but the question is, what can be done to prevent it from happening again? That's why we're focusing today on this entire topic for the show. Now, we could do something about mental illness, perhaps, to treat it better. Maybe we need more security on campuses. Maybe we need more gun restrictions so that people who are deranged can't get guns and ammunition. Or maybe we need to let students arm themselves so that they can defend themselves if a deranged gunman walks into the room. These are difficult questions, but I'm going to ask these hard questions of my guests. Sitting to my right is Phillip Van Cleave, president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, and sitting to his right is Brian Siebel, senior attorney of the Legal Action Project at the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. I'm not the only one that can ask some tough questions. You can too. This is a live show. The numbers are on your screen, and I encourage you to call in. Gentlemen, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Phillip, let me start with you. It seems to me that Cho's mental illness was, there were a lot of indications of it. You had two writing teachers that tried to get him into counseling. His plays and poems were full of violence and death and abuse. You had students who were scared to be in class with him because of them. There were two women that called the police because he was stalking them. And then finally you had a court commit him involuntarily to a psychiatric hospital, although he was released as not an imminent danger to himself or others in December 2005. My question for you is, do you think that someone who fits the profile of this killer before, obviously, he went about his killing, do you think that someone that fits that profile should be allowed to own a gun, to buy ammunition? And if not, what laws do you think should be done to prevent someone with this kind of illness, as shown at this time, from getting a gun?
Well, first of all, I would point out that he wasn't actually committed. That's just a fine point. He was detained to determine if he should be committed.
For one night, that's correct.
Yes, and the judge apparently, upon looking at the paperwork and the response, determined that he shouldn't be committed, which I'm kind of questioning, but I haven't seen the documents. I didn't see what the judge saw. He may not have known everything that was going on at that university. So, but the failure seems to be in the judicial system here. They had enough information to commit him, but they chose not to.
Well, let me ask you this. Assume someone in the future fits the exact same profile as this person. All right, you have these very strange writings. You have two women he's been stalking. You have a judge who at least felt he should be detained for a night. You're right, not committed, but detained for a night in a psychiatric hospital. He also was on prescription medications. We know that. He was someone who, at least his roommates and all, barely said anything, was a loner, didn't have any friends. We have all this profile. Someone in the future meeting this profile, as much as we knew at that time, should that person be allowed to own a gun?
The problem with it is, it's a tough answer, because being mentally ill or being just strange is something that's hard to put your finger on. It's hard to quantify. Somebody that might be acting strange to us may not actually be mentally ill. He just may be a person that just behaves differently. It's a very tough case. I think the current law says you've got to be committed. That is, somebody has to look at you and say, yeah, you're missing a couple screws.
Well, now, he was on psychiatric medications.
Yes.
We know that, although I don't know the details of those medications.
People are on such medications and are perfectly fine. If they get off of them, they may get depressed.
So in your view, knowing what we knew about Cho the day before the killing, there was not enough, in your mind, evidence there to prevent this person from owning a gun?
I think the judge should have committed him. I think that was the problem. When it got to that point and the judge had all the evidence, I think he should have been committed.
Based on what?
Well, based on the doctor. There was a doctor that said he thought he was a threat to himself. Based upon the university saying, if they told him, that he was following people around, he was writing strange things. Basically, at that point, he could have been committed at that point.
So you think it was not a failure of our laws, but a failure of the judicial system?
Absolutely, at this point, from what I've seen.
Brian Siebel, what's your view on this?
Well, he in fact was adjudicated a mental defective under the 1968 Gun Control Act, and he definitely should have been prohibited to buy those firearms. The problem was that information did not get into the system, so that when they ran the background check in Virginia, it didn't flag him, or he really should have been denied the purchase of those two firearms. The law is very clear. If you're adjudicated mentally defective or committed to a mental institution, these are not ands, these are ors, you should be denied access to a firearm, and regulations of ATF define adjudicated as a mental defective as a person who essentially, where a judge has determined that he is a danger to himself or others. And the box, there was a form that the judge filled out, checked off the box. He was mentally ill and was a danger to himself. At that point, he frankly should have been put into the system, and when they ran the check, he should have been denied sale of those guns.
You're absolutely right, the judge checked that box. But 24 hours later, someone at that psychiatric hospital released him saying he was not in imminent danger to himself and others. Now, this was back in December 2005.
That doesn't...
Maybe it wasn't imminent in 2005.
That doesn't matter. Once that they didn't negate the box. They didn't tear up the form. They didn't overrule the form. They basically had adjudicated him a mental defective, and once that's happened, you should be denied a firearm purchase, period, and even if it was a year later.
Well, let me ask that,
so
Phillip,
absolutely,
do you agree that once the judge checks that box, it doesn't matter that a day later they said he was in imminent danger? Once the judge checks that box, according to the law, the Brady law, he should not have been able to own a gun. Do you agree?
Yeah, even in Virginia, once you're in that mode, then you have to go in front of a judge at some point and prove that your doctors, I guess, have to come with you to prove that you're no longer.
So we have an interesting agreement among both of you on this. What you're both saying, it seems to me, is that Virginia failed to to follow the law, that the state of Virginia didn't send this judge's form to the proper background check authorities so that he could be prevented from owning a gun. You both agree on that?
There's a serious national problem here. I mean, Virginia is not the only state that has a problem getting mental health records into the Brady background check system.
Why is it such a problem? I mean,
well, some of it is privacy issues, some of it is lack of funding, some of it is, it's a very difficult, it's probably the grayest area of all the disqualifying factors for buying a firearm in this country, mental health records. And the problem, some states do it very well, but other states do not, and there's a big gap. There's probably a lot of people that have been adjudicated mentally defective or even committed whose records are not in the system and are not being flagged when they go to buy a gun at a gun dealership.
Now, Congresswoman Carolyn McCarthy, Democrat of New York, of Long Island, herself a victim of gun violence. Her husband and her son were both shot by the crazy Long Island killer, and in fact, that's what propelled her to Congress. She has a bill. She's tried twice. It's passed the House, has not passed the Senate. But according to the Washington Post, she's working with John Dingell, who's a pro-gun, pro-NRA Democrat, and apparently even the NRA is considering becoming on board on just this question of states submitting all mental health illnesses to this background check, providing money to do it, and the bill would also penalize states that don't do that. Phillip Van Cleave, would you support that bill?
It really depends. I don't trust Carolyn McCarthy as far as I could throw her when it comes to guns.
But John Dingell you may trust, or the NRA you'd certainly trust. Not even them.
Depends. But the problem is you certainly don't want somebody who has basically gone in on their own to be treated. My fear is that this could be twisted to say, if you've basically committed yourself, like you've gone to a doctor, you know you're depressed, so you go for help. You don't want somebody like that taken out being able to own a gun, because then they would have every encouragement not to ever seek help for a problem. And we want anybody that's having any kind of mental problems to seek appropriate help for it.
Now, of course, Michael Kennedy in Fairfax County is another case that Virginians are well familiar with. Many people across the country are. This is a 17-year-old kid. In fact, his father was just convicted for having all these guns available, who had shot, I believe, the family pet, but he committed himself to a mental institution. He wasn't involuntarily committed. Are you saying that in Michael Kennedy's case, Phillip, that the state should not have been able to prevent him from buying a gun?
If he committed himself, then no, unless the state has some other recourse to say that he's still insane, that they can't, basically if they're unable to treat him, that would be something different. But you don't want to discourage people from going for help, and that's what the unintended consequences will be if you make a penalty on it.
I'm going to give you a chance, Brian, to answer that. I promise you. Before we do, we're going to go to a break. When we go to a break, I want to play a little bit more of Colin Goddard, a victim of the Virginia Tech massacre.
See from across the way was she was shot in the back. One of my friends, Christina, and there were a few students that were still not moving when I was carried out of the room. From what I remember, the number of bangs and the small interval between each one, I guess once we kept hearing them, did sound like a gun. I've never heard a pistol go off. It was in the hallway. It was muffled. Right. I wasn't exactly sure what it was. Yeah, he reloaded in my room.
You watched him reload?
I did not watch. I heard him reload.
You heard him reload. Okay.
I was facing the ground. I played dead. I didn't try to make a move at all. Right. That's what everybody was doing. There were a few girls that were crying. They screamed out when they got shot. All of us remained on the floor. Nobody tried to get up. Nobody tried to be a hero. And getting shot was the first for me. And
history has demonstrated that violence only begets greater violence. And injustice only begets greater injustice. This is not the tradition of our great nation. This is not how we want the United States to be known around the world. We have another tradition that we think ought to prevail. One that is more just and more powerful. There is a better way, If we truly want peace and security, then we must work hard for justice. If you're concerned that we've become a nation whose national policies are grounded in beliefs that are centered on a line embedded in BS, then don't miss Escape from Orwellia Nation, a talk show in which concerned regular citizens like you and me, not self-serving media spinmeisters, wade through the barrage of newspeak and doublethink that pollutes public discourse today. Big brother, big business, big media, and the big national parties who collude to keep we the people afraid and in the dark would prefer that you not watch. Show them who's in charge. Tune in to Escape from Orwellia Nation right here on Channel 10.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop, a very special Inside Scoop about the Virginia Tech Massacre. My guests are Phillip Van Cleave, President of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, and Brian Siebel, Senior Attorney of the Legal Action Project at the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Brian, before the break, Phillip was saying that you don't want to have policies whereby someone who voluntarily commits themselves to mental institutions can't buy guns, because then people won't voluntarily commit themselves to mental institutions. How do you respond to that?
Well, the law is actually involuntary commitment and adjudicated mental defective, so a judge actually has to determine that. But certainly, we shouldn't be making it easier for these kinds of unstable individuals to be getting guns. We really need to be keeping guns out of the hands of these types of individuals. Certainly, we're not advocating anything that would make it less likely for people to seek mental health assistance. And one of the problems, I think we're going to get to this issue, is that it's the 18 to 24-year-olds, 4-year-olds, who have the most mental health problems in this country. It's the peak period for both mental health problems, for crime, for a host of things that suggest that it would be very irresponsible to be putting more guns into the hands of those types of people, especially at
Okay, but let's
schools
look at
and
the case of
universities.
Michael Kennedy. I mean, this is a guy in Fairfax County who was clearly mentally ill. I mean, not just shooting family pets, but making all kinds of threats. He had committed himself voluntarily to a mental institution. His parents knew that. They had all kinds of guns laying around, and then of course he goes and he shoots up a police station and kills 2 police officers. The fact that he voluntarily committed himself, I guess I'll let you just...
Isn't he 17? Wasn't he 17?
I think he was...
Okay, a 17-year-old...
I don't remember.
17-year-old, I mean, there's a reason we have a prohibition on people under 21 buying handguns, for example. I mean, there's a reason for that. There's a reason that we... I think his age clearly, aside from whatever mental state he might have been in, it's just dangerous for young people to be having handguns.
What about that? What about the age restriction?
Well, we have people in the military at 18 carrying machine guns.
Yeah, but they got a sergeant who's watching them, supposedly.
Well, supposedly. But the thing about this, again, with Kennedy was another failure of government. His parents tried to have him committed.
Right.
And the state turned him away. What do you do in a case like that? Again, there were attempts here that could have changed that whole outcome had the state not turned its back on it.
How about a law that says that if you're under 18 or under 21, maybe, I'm not sure, but if your parents try to have you committed, then you get on a gun list and you can't buy a gun legally?
Well, if you have bad parents and they try, I mean, I guess our fear here is you want to turn over your life unless somebody's adjudicated you. We really want.
Well, no, but let's ask about it. Let's say you've got a 16-year-old. Maybe you have bad parents, so they can't own a gun until they achieve majority. Is that such a terrible thing? I mean, if parents feel that their child is dangerous. Most parents are very loving parents. If a parent comes to me and says, my child's dangerous, there's, I think, a pretty good chance that kid's dangerous.
What's wrong with the psychiatrist looking at it and actually making that determination, or is it the parents that?
Well, how about this? If the parents say that I think my child's too sick to own a gun, then maybe you could put a red flag. So if they try to own a gun, then the gun dealer says, you know what, son, if you want to get a gun, you're going to have to go before a court and a psychiatrist to prove that you are able to own a gun because your parents say they don't think you are. How about that in that case?
Well, he can't own a gun on his own. He can't purchase a gun until he's at least 18, and then it would be a long gun. If he's 16 or something, he can't go buy a gun anyhow.
So you don't mind age restrictions at the age of 18 at least?
18 is fine. I mean, at that point, you're the beginning of being an adult.
And
below that, the
can I
parents have to buy.
Can I jump in here?
Let's jump in 1 second. One last question for you, though. We do have a drinking age of 21. Do you think that's inconsistent, that you can own a gun at 18, but you can't drink until you're 21?
It's not the same thing. I think
Drinking's more dangerous.
drinking is different. It's a whole different. It's not a constitutionally protected right.
Okay, I'll get to the Constitution in 1 second. You wanted to jump in, Brady.
Well, I mean, where did he get the gun? From his parents? The parents should have locked up their guns. There's no question that if they have
The father was
guns,
just convicted, in fact.
if
for
they
not
have
locking up
guns,
his
right, they should have a gun safe where they should secure the guns so that teenagers don't get access to them. I mean, that's just plain and simple. Regardless of whatever their mental health condition might be, we shouldn't be giving guns to really young people unless they're under direct supervision of an adult. Certainly anyone under 18 that's using a gun should be under direct supervision at all times that they have a gun in their hands. So, and beyond that, I mean, certainly the reason we have a bar on buying handguns until you're 21 is because younger people tend to be more unstable. And I think that actually
Phillip
goes...
says 18, you say 21. Is it
21 is purchasing of a handgun. The problem is actually in this society, you can't buy a gun at a gun dealership unless you're 21, but you can possess a gun if a handgun if you're 18. That to us is actually a weakness in the law that shouldn't be there.
That is a strange standard. You can own one at 18, but you can't buy one until you're 21.
A handgun.
A handgun.
Yeah.
So if you want one between 18 and 21...
Your parents would have to give it to you.
And you could possess any gun. Frankly, you can buy an assault rifle if you're 18 in this country. We've just let the assault weapons ban expire.
You can't
and
buy
with
a
it,
handgun, but you can buy an assault weapon.
Exactly, with as big a magazine clip as you want, because we let the assault weapon ban expire in a couple of years ago, and with it, the ban on high-capacity magazines with more than 10 rounds.
What about a Glock, which is something on but it's a handgun? Does that
No,
mean you
a
have to
handgun is a handgun. It's a prohibition on buying from a dealer unless you're 21. But you
Can you buy at a gun show?
Well, if you're no, you cannot. Well, if from a private individual,
From a private
yes.
individual
From
at
a
a gun
private
show.
individual, yes. And you can buy an AK-47 if you're 18 in this country. So it's just.
Let me ask Phillip, should you be able to buy an AK-47 if you're 18 in this country?
I don't see a problem with it. No, it should be fine. That's a rifle. You know, we make a big thing out of the AK-47, the assault weapon ban. That was all about cosmetics. That was one of the biggest jokes that have ever been played upon the American people, and we all fell for it. It all dealt with cosmetics. The same
not
gun,
cosmetics.
if you took this, there were identical guns would shoot the same ammunition, the same number of rounds, just as fast. They weren't considered assault weapons at all. They were just considered regular rifles.
Well, maybe the answer is to toughen the ban instead of lessening. I mean, totally apart from the assault weapons ban, do you think it's a weird inconsistency in the law, isn't it, that you have to be 21 to buy from a licensed dealer, but if you're 18, you can go to some gun show and buy from an unlicensed person who owns the gun? I mean, that is inconsistent, isn't it?
I suppose you could think it would be as inconsistent. I mean, in reality,
The difference is you would make the restrictions less and you would make the restrictions more.
Absolutely, and we certainly shouldn't be having high-capacity magazines, detachable magazines, which is the key to increasing the firepower of weapons. I mean, I think there was some evidence that Mr. Cho may have had a 33-round clip that goes right in the Glock. You can go to Glock's website, and they'll advertise this 33-round magazine and sell it to you, no questions asked. So, I mean, you don't need a 33-round magazine for any legitimate use of a firearm.
I fully disagree.
Well, let me ask you,
right.
why does someone need? I mean, Cho had 17 clips. One, at least we know, had at least 33-round capacity, and some of it he got on the internet. In fact, I just read in the paper he got today some of it on eBay. He bought some of these ammunition clips. Why does someone need a 33 clip in a Glock?
33 round? Well, for one thing, for target practicing. You load it up and you can just shoot for a long time without constantly having to take the magazine out, reload the magazine, put it in. I mean, you'd be surprised how many rounds you can shoot plinking at things.
Well, you know, apart from target practice, does it have any other use? I mean, here's what I'm trying to understand. I understand people like shooting guns, and that's fun. But it seems to me that some of the stuff that he used, hollow point bullets, for example, can't be used for hunting, is my understanding. They're designed to kill people, not animals. It would spread the deer meat all over the place. So why does why should someone have a right to have well, different things, armor-piercing bullets, or hollow-point bullets.
They're very different things.
There are different things, or an assault weapon.
Okay, well, let's talk about hollow point. Hollow point are what are carried for self-defense. Yes, they're used in self-defense typically against the person, although they will work on animals. But the idea there is that the round hits you and it doesn't penetrate through, endangering things beyond. So if you have to shoot at somebody, like if the police were shooting at Cho trying to stop him, they wouldn't want their rounds going through and then endangering everybody behind him.
But let me ask you
Hollow
this.
points don't do that.
If I have a clip with 33 hollow points, that to me, I guess, could only be for self-defense if I've got 20 people rushing me at once, because they're designed to kill on impact. They're not designed to just disable. So if I have a clip of 33 hollow points, what could be the legitimate purpose of having that?
You know, I don't, for the typical person walking down the street, you probably don't need it, but how are you going to restrict it? And what's the point in restricting it?
Well,
So it's
we
too
restricted
difficult
it
to
for
restrict
10
it.
years
Well, you
in
can't
this country.
restrict anything. The Brady bill or the assault weapon ban, in theory, didn't allow you to have those things. They were available all over the place.
Well, that's because it allowed grandfathered, pre-ban magazines
there.
to stay in existence. But certainly one of the things, we did a study actually that showed that during the 10 years of the assault weapon ban, the rate at which assault weapons were recovered by police in crime declined by 2/3. That to us is a very effective law. It meant fewer assault weapons were being picked up on the streets of America, and during those years, crime came down. Actually, at all 10 years of the assault weapon ban, overall violent crime came down. Since the ban has expired, what's happened? Crime is going up, gun crime is going up in our cities across the country. It jumped 50% from 2004 to 2005, and the preliminary data is it's continuing to go up in 2006. I think you see this mostly in urban centers throughout the country, but in fact, so we're actually not going in the right direction at this point. We're going backwards. We're making it easier for people like Mr. Cho to acquire extraordinary firepower.
Let me go down the list if I can. You support banning hollow point bullets.
To us, it's not the ammunition. It's access to the firearms itself.
Okay, so you don't necessarily support banning hollow point bullets. I don't know what the Brady Center's position is. Do you have a position on
our
this?
point, it's who's firing the gun is the primary issue. Who gets the gun, who's firing the gun, what kind of firepower is that person being able to use? So
Okay, but
certainly
those are
we're
two
in
separate
favor
questions, right? I mean, who's getting the gun?
To us, it's the
the
33-round magazine that is the problem. The high-capacity magazines are the problem because they increase the firepower for everyone, and there really is no legitimate
Let me separate the questions
use.
if I can, because I think you may agree on the question of who fires, and then we'll get into what people are firing. Let's talk about who fires. Philip, do you agree that someone who's been adjudicated mentally ill shouldn't have a right to own a gun?
Unless they've been cleared, that's correct.
Okay, do you agree that someone who has a violent criminal record should not be allowed to own a
Violent
gun?
criminal record, agreed.
Okay, do you think that someone who's gotten a domestic restraining order for domestic
No,
violence,
do not. Not if it's a
even
misdemeanor.
if it's adjudicated?
No, if it's a misdemeanor, we do not. Misdemeanors are not meant to take away our civil rights. Felonies do.
Even if it's been adjudicated that a man was stalking a woman and threatening her with violence?
If it's only a misdemeanor, it wasn't that serious. Otherwise, they would charge him with a felony.
That's totally false. I mean, there's a study done by Garen Winnemute that showed that violent misdemeanors are much more likely to misuse firearms and to shoot other people. So there's data behind the reason why we ban domestic violence misdemeanors from getting guns. And these are people who have in fact threatened their spouses or their significant others. So clearly they should not be getting guns.
We have to take another break. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back after this.
Yeah, I'd like to come back on that point.
We'll get you.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish...
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Hey, mister, studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last cup.
Oh, no, mister. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, Mr. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
That was shocking again. Just I didn't know he was going to shoot me again.
Right.
And then again and again and then again for the third time in the leg.
Right.
You heard a few sirens. You heard some yelling going off in the distance of the police establishing the perimeter. I believe there was another student in my room who was making a heavy breathing, gurgling sound. It sounded like he had been possibly injured in the neck. It was affecting his breathing. I had one fairly close friend. Yes, it was girl Christina who was shot in the back.
Okay.
And I was able to talk to her.
She told me what you said to her. Do you remember what you said to her when you got on the phone?
I told her I loved her and she needs to come over here now.
Pretty powerful stuff. That, of course, is Colin Godard, 21-year-old victim at Virginia Tech. My guests today are Phillip Van Cleave, president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, and Brian Siebel, senior attorney of the Legal Action Project at the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Phillip, I know you had some responses that you wanted to give before the break.
Yes, well, on the hollow, well, there were several items we talked about, like the hollow point bullets. Again, they're not something that you would want to ban. As a matter of fact, you're asking if they would support it or we would, but they prevent worse things from happening by shooting somebody with a solid bullet. Again, you can endanger people behind you. There's a reason that they have hollow points.
Now, I understand why police need hollow points. I understand why the military needs hollow points. But part of my concern is that someone who has such a weapon, it can be turned, and since it's designed to kill, it's not designed to maim, it's not designed to make someone, disable somebody, that it could be turned and used against them. And I'd be curious, and we may have a battle of statistics here, but I'd be curious how often when people have guns, they are used for their intended purpose, that is self-defense, and how often they're used to harm oneself or others.
Well, the statistics show anywhere from 500,000 to 2.5 million times a year, depending on who you want to listen to, that guns are used defensively in the United States. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that a shot was fired. 9 times out of 10, if you have to pull a gun, the criminal sees the gun, and criminals aren't brave people. They tend to just take off and run because they don't want to be shot. That's
of course, that would work with a gun that didn't have any bullets.
That's true. It's that 1 out of 10 chance that you got somebody on drugs or somebody that's determined to keep coming after you, basically calling that bluff to where you'd have to take the next step.
Brian, you agree with those statistics?
Well, I think they're inflated. Certainly the 2.5 million is way inflated. But I think we ought to come back to the issue of how did he get his gun and how do we keep people like him from getting guns like this? I think not only should he not have been able to buy this gun if the system had worked as it was intended to with the Gun Control Act and the Brady Law, but I think we ought to look beyond that, because had he turned up on a flag and been denied at the gun store, he might have gone down the road to a gun show, as you mentioned, and bought a gun off somebody who didn't have to run a background check on him. So we think we ought to have universal background checks in this country, which a number of states have, which if you want to sell a gun as a private citizen to someone else, you have to go through a gun dealer, and the gun dealer would then run a background check. And if a flag were to show up on mental health history, the person would be turned down.
Now, Brian, of course, is talking about the infamous gun show loophole.
Yeah.
Now, why do you...
it's more than that. It's actually more because, there are other ways even beyond gun shows that allow private citizens.
In other words, exactly, a private citizen can buy a gun from a private citizen without going through this background check. Now, you've said that you agree with Brian and with me, frankly, that people with mental illness, and although we can discuss the level of mental illness, and people who committed violent crime shouldn't be able to own a gun. If that's the case, why don't require these background checks that we already require for licensed dealers for any time there's a gun
There's
sale?
a very specific reason that we don't do that, and that is to guarantee that there is not a gun registry in this country. There's a problem with that at the federal level. There's also a problem that when you've got a registry, then that increases the chances that the government at some point can come and confiscate guns.
Okay,
The state of California, if I might, has a system. They're the biggest state in the nation. They've had this system for a long time. They have a universal background check system. There's no problem. It's the biggest state in the country, the most populous. And so there's 19 states that actually...
registrations.
There are 19
I register my
states.
car with the government. Why shouldn't I have to register my gun with the government?
And that stops drunk driving. I didn't even think about that.
Well, obviously it doesn't, but at least if someone steals my car,
well,
we have a good idea that the car's missing. I mean, if you own 38 guns and none of them are registered, you might not even know a gun's
the government can trace them back. With the serial number, they can find out who owns the gun.
How if there's no registry?
Well, what they do is they take the serial number, go back to the manufacturer. The manufacturer knows who they sent to, what distributor they picked. The distributor knows what dealer, and the dealer has the paperwork. They
but that can be sold from private person to private person.
Well, at some point, then yeah,
it's actually unusual.
Brought down the line, you would lose it.
Here's my question.
You'd report it stolen.
My understanding, and you two can both correct me if you're wrong, is there some 10,000 deaths a year in America from guns? Is that?
It's more than 10,000 homicides, correct.
More than 10,000?
Yes.
I thought it was homicides or suicides.
No, it's 30,000. We're talking close to 30,000 when you start including unintentional deaths and suicides.
30,000 deaths
almost
by
30,000 by, yes.
So here's we have, cars can be dangerous. We register cars. 30,000, and I don't know if you agree with those figures, you might not, but tens of thousands of people die each year from guns. The irony is that 30 dying a day in Virginia Tech, there were probably 30 plus dying a day that same day, April 16th, elsewhere in the country. Why not, simply, if you're gonna use your gun for a lawful purpose, why should you be afraid of the government knowing how many guns you have? I mean, if the government's out to get you, they're going to get you. They have tanks. They have more powerful items than guns.
That's not the point. And they have confiscated guns in California. They did use that system of registration to come and take guns away. This was a real-life example.
Assault rifles.
It's a firearm, and they did confiscate them.
Right. But why is that a bad thing?
To have somebody come and take your property away, why is that a bad thing?
Well, what if you're a violent criminal?
Maybe they should come take your car.
Well, no, but if you're a violent criminal...
No, these weren't violent criminals. These were people that legally owned those guns, and the state suddenly said, we don't think you should own them anymore.
Because they banned the guns.
Yeah, so they came and took them away.
Well, if I have a weapon and the weapon becomes illegal, well, maybe there should be eminent domain. Maybe they should pay you for them. I mean, I'm not saying that.
No, the Second Amendment is pretty clear, especially
well, actually, I wanted to pull out the Second Amendment.
Let's do that.
I brought my Constitution with me, and I did so because I wanted to talk about the Second Amendment. Let me read it to the public here, because it's the only one of the 10 amendments of the Bill of Rights that actually gives a reason for it, which I always find very interesting. It says, quote, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." So, Philip, let me ask you the first part of the question. Do you think a well-regulated militia today in 2007 is necessary to the security of a free state? I'll accept that it was 200 years ago.
Yes.
Is it still necessary?
Yes. The people, let's take the event of an emergency. Let's say that we had a major terrorist attack. Let's say it was in Richmond, near where I live. The police would be easily overwhelmed. We've seen police overwhelmed with things much smaller than a major terrorist attack. At that point, you could literally have a situation where you're on your own. In fact, I've seen that happen.
Well, but if you're on your own, that wouldn't be a well-regulated militia.
Yes.
Wouldn't a well-regulated militia be, for example, the State National Guard?
No, it isn't. In fact, the National Guard didn't even exist when this was written. It was meant to be the average, everyday person. That we were to be well-trained, well-regulated in those days.
Well-regulated
well-trained.
By whom? By the state.
Well-trained.
But trained by the state, right?
No,
the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You were meant to know how to use a gun. They wanted you to have a gun and know how to use it, so if they called you together for the common defense, or if you had to defend against a country that had gotten taken over by, say, a coup, then they wanted you to be able to be trained.
Who would regulate a well-regulated militia?
Regulate just means well-trained. That's all it means.
Who? I'm just asking, who would train you?
You would train yourself as long as you had a gun and knew how to shoot it.
No.
In your view, well-regulated means people train themselves, regulate themselves? I mean, when I think of regulation, I think of a government does a regulation. I don't regulate myself.
You're thinking of current English, yes, but you have to look at when that was written and what clock was well regulated. Did you think that meant the government came in and controlled your clock? No, it meant it worked well. It kept time properly.
Look at Article 1, Section 8, which defines who essentially makes the rules about the militia. It's Congress, and certain things are done by Congress, and some things are left to the states.
Let me read Article 1, Section 8, since you bring it up. It says, Congress shall have the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. It goes on to talk about training according to discipline prescribed by Congress.
Yeah, the states would train pursuant to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So at that time, they fully understood what a militia was. You know, Madison wrote most of the Constitution here, and he essentially drafted the original version of the Second Amendment as well. And so clearly you have a system where Congress sets up the militia. Yes, exactly. And the reason.
What about Article 1, Section 8?
Look at the Virginia Constitution.
Okay, don't have that with me.
Well, that spells it right out in there. It says that a well-regulated militia consisting of the body of the people trained to arms.
But that was actually that was a version. If I might interrupt, that was actually considered the body of the people was part of one of the drafts in Congress. They took it out. The one that passed the Senate doesn't have that language because they took it out.
That in creating the Bill of Rights, they took that out.
They took that out.
Here's my question. Look, I understand in 1789. 1791, when the Bill of Rights was passed, I understand the people had just fought the Revolutionary War. Great Britain had come in, tried to take people's guns, and they fought back in the Revolution. And in state militias, by the way, the states individually, under George Washington. Okay, I understand that. What I don't understand is in 2007, unless you think you have a right to own a tank, and I don't think you think that, but maybe I'm wrong. Unless you think an individual has a right to own a tank, my weapon, or even my assault weapon, can't protect me against the U.S. Army. I mean, if I'm trying to fight the U.S. Army, they're going to win, because they have tanks. They have nuclear missiles, and I don't think you're saying individuals should have that.
It's kind of funny when you look at Afghanistan, when the Russians first went in there. You know, they got basically run out on a stick by a country that simply had small arms. But is that really your fear?
Is it really? Do you really believe that the Second Amendment, is its entire purpose to protect us from invasion of a foreign country?
There were three purposes that the Founding Fathers gave for the Second Amendment. It lists a preamble, which is what you read about the militia. That's only part of the reasoning. One was self-defense. Two was defense of the state. And I mentioned a case where maybe a national disaster happened. The police are nowhere to be found. This happened in Louisiana, where some areas, the neighborhoods band together and they protected themselves until the police could show up and then take over formally. And the third thing was protection against a country where it had turned tyrannical. And countries do turn tyrannical. And it may well be a reason that our country hasn't in 200 years, is because it has 80 million armed people in it. It would be awfully tough to take this country
Brian, citizens groups coming together under the aegis of the government, I think may be under the Second Amendment. But what about an individual? Are they under the Second Amendment?
No, it's all about service in the militia. Now, it turned out at the time there was actually a Militia Act passed the year after the Second Amendment, which required people to actually have a firearm, but in service of the militia. Okay, so the Miller case of 1939, which basically almost all federal appellate courts have followed. Until recently, there was a case in the District of Columbia, actually. It may end up going back to the Supreme Court on this issue. But basically, the Miller court said the declaration and guarantee of the Second Amendment have to be interpreted with a militia purpose. And so they're tied together. It's written as a whole, and that's the point of the
toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Let's go back and look at a profile of a mass killer.
What distinguishes mass shooters is their paranoia. And some of them are extremely paranoid to the point of having a major mental illness, and some of them just have paranoid personalities.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. Let's impeach the
president for life. My name is David Bell. I am a resident of Virginia's 11th Congressional District, and I ask Representative Tom Davis to initiate or support investigations into violations of the law by President Bush and his administration.
Tom Davis, my name is Jean Reynolds, and I'm one of your constituents. I want you to join immediately with other members of Congress to begin an investigation of the criminal acts that George Bush has committed.
I'm Nick Spengler of Ashland, Virginia, and I would like our troops to come home and Bush to get out of office.
My name is Nancy Maynard. I live in the 11th Congressional District, and this message is for Tom Davis. I'm asking you to please investigate for impeachment.
My name is Bruce Smith. I live in the 11th Congressional District in Woodbridge, Virginia. I want Congressman Davis to support the investigation of President Bush and Vice President Cheney and those that foisted this war on us.
What distinguishes mass shooters is their paranoia, and some of them are extremely paranoid to the point of having a major mental illness, and some of them just have paranoid personalities that focus on the society around them or a particular ethnic group or a nationality. Until we know more about at least the gunman involved and his modus operandi, we won't be able to understand the dimensions of his paranoia yet. First of all, you have someone who is, to begin with, alienated and draws a lot of sense of power and self-recognition from guns and fantasies of destruction. But that's not enough, because there are many people who feel that way and they're not necessarily at risk. When paranoia and resentment to the broader community kicks in, that person is much more alienated and much more readily taps into the ideas of destroying strangers. The problem is not so much an idea of spotting somebody who's at risk, because that person may well be quiet, may not have communicated about his fantasies about weapons. What we as a society have to do is to distinguish these people as perverts, because perverts don't inspire copycats. And Columbine's perpetrators became anti-heroes. And perpetrators of mass shootings inspire alienated people with violent fantasies who are resentful and identify with the power of people who are able to destroy through guns. It's important to recognize that this goes beyond conflict. People who are conflicted about academic achievement often commit suicide. If there is a particular conflict, a personal conflict, then someone may attack the teacher, the other student, and leave it at that. When an individual kills strangers, that reflects broader resentment and personality issues that give a person a sense of entitlement. I will achieve immortality by how many of you I can destroy.
We were talking together, and I just looked at him and said, "You seem, something like you seem so lonely. Do you have any friends?" And he said, "I am lonely and I don't have any friends." And then I talked to him about how difficult it is when you're feeling really sad and there's nobody there for you, and that I hoped that that would be something for him that would change. I tried to find out more about his family. He was very, very guarded about that. He was actually quite arrogant and could be quite obnoxious, and was also deeply, it seemed, insecure. So there's often that combination in people who are very troubled, and he had it to an extreme degree, I think. I tried to make that happen as much as I could, and I even called over to counseling, seeing if I could require it, but they said that that was not possible, and they advised me to try to just take him over physically myself. So every time we met, I would say, "Okay, today will you come over with me to counseling and we'll talk?" And he always would refuse to do that. I mean, I wish I could have lifted him up bodily and I would have done if I could. That's a question I'll probably ask myself for the rest of my life. What else could I have done? Could I have done more? I think probably all of us could have done more in some ways. So I think it's a fair question, and all I can say to it really is that there'll be no one who will be asking that question of me more than I will be.
Well, there always are going to be crazy people, and there are always going to be deranged people. I don't think we can get rid of them. The question is, how do we prevent someone like that from doing the kind of harm that this man did. Now, it's been suggested by the Virginia Citizens Defense League that one way to do it is to let other students carry guns and perhaps stop someone like this man from doing what he did. Brian, what do you think of that idea?
Well, we think it's rather irresponsible. I mean, first of all, it's entirely speculative whether or not arming the students would have stopped this particular shooter. He might have worn a flak jacket. He might have carried even greater firepower, for example. If the teacher was armed, he might have just targeted the teacher first, which I think he did actually in one of the classrooms. But it's the 18 to 24-year-old period, which I was trying to mention earlier, for a person's life is the most volatile period in a person's life. It's the highest risk for alcohol and drug use, crime, suicide. So these are the idea of introducing guns onto campuses where youths are then having greater access to them is only going to increase the death toll on our campuses. It's not going to end up reducing it. Schools are actually right now the safest place in society. Students who are college students are 20% less likely to be victims of violent crime than non-college students in the same age period. And 93% of the violent crime against college students occurs off campus. So actually the campus environment is a safer place, and it's in part because almost every university in this country, every college, bans guns or has very tight restrictions on firearms.
Philip, of course, Iraq is full of guns today, as is Afghanistan, and they have I just read 160 people died in one suicide bomb. They have more gun violence certainly than we have in this country. In Chechnya in 2004, there were terrorists that took over a school, and armed townspeople in Chechnya came in. They shot at the terrorists. They killed a number of school children, not that they meant to. They did it unintentionally. And then the terrorists some of them actually slipped away, saying they were just one of those armed vigilantes that was going in to save the kids. How would your plan be different from what happened in Chechnya?
Well, what happened here is the idea here is a person on the inside that's actually facing death at the hands of a crazy person or a cold-blooded murderer would be able to basically defend themselves at that point. So picture the case where he came in and took over a classroom. First of all, many of those students would have known he was coming because they would have heard gunshots. Many of them testified they were hearing gunshots as he went to the different rooms. At that point, they would be prepared to protect themselves
now, of course,
from him.
If he went to a middle school classroom or an elementary school
tough.
classroom...
Well, they can't arm themselves, but the teacher could. There's nothing wrong with the teacher getting a concealed carry permit, getting the background check. See, the idea here is...
Now, what if there's an exchange of gunfire and the police come in and they don't know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy?
I'll take my chances on a sure death versus having some kind of crossfire or even a confusion. I'll take my chances versus being unarmed and definitely going to die.
How about that, Brian?
Mark, I don't know if I can show this.
Yeah, we can.
There's a perfect a cartoon in this morning's Washington Post by Tom Towles. Crossfire, and you have this family saying, we decided the solution was to let the good people shoot it out with the bad ones. That's what he's talking about. I mean, the executive director of the Virginia State Police said he thought if they'd armed the students, it could have led to crossfire. And certainly,
what about the idea
that is going to increase
let's talk about
risk.
the idea about a flak jacket, because I thought that was a really good point. I mean, the bad guy knows he's going to come in and he's going to kill everyone. He can do what the Columbine killers did. They can wear an armor-plated jacket. We certainly can't expect every teacher or every student every day to go to school with armor, body armor. So clearly, the killer can be prepared.
He's got the advantage.
He can have better weapons, stronger weapons. He can have armor on him. And
the police would have the same problem dealing with them in that case, which you would have to
the police, though, I would hope would wear their armor every day and would be. I mean, they know when they're going in.
Right.
I'd like to raise another point.
Yeah.
In high schools in this country, 2,100 students have been expelled for bringing a gun to school. Now, if you arm the teachers, how many of those instances would they think there was a threat and end up shooting? I mean, do we really want teachers shooting students? Do we want to? What if a student just displays the gun? Okay, teacher doesn't know whether he's going to fire. There's 2,100 people expelled last year from high schools in this country, and so there's a host of situations that would make it much more
The
dangerous.
assumption there is that the teachers are a bunch of dolts, and they wouldn't know,
Well,
that
some know how to handle guns.
teachers are
and
not
some don't.
police
They wouldn't be. They
Should we
wouldn't
train
be,
all teachers into handling guns?
It would be up to the teacher. They would need to want. They would want to have to do this. This should not be thrust upon anybody. If they want to get the training, if they want to get the permit, the background checks, the checks to make sure they're not drunkards, and all the stuff that goes with getting a permit, that puts you in a group of people that are the most law-abiding that there are, then let them do it, because they're part of a group that just doesn't commit crimes.
We're running out of time. I heard Glenn Beck say the other day that if this guy couldn't have gotten a gun, he just would have gotten a knife. Now, do you really think he could have, killed 32 people and injured 30 with just a knife?
He would have got a gun. No problem. Look at England.
So that's a silly
They've completely banned guns.
Well, let's talk about England. Now,
Yeah.
they have completely banned guns, and they have, I think, a few dozen gun crimes a year.
Which would be impossible because they ban
30,000.
guns, of course. But they, actually,
No, but it's
had like
way
60
less per
sure.
capita than it is in the United States.
They've always been less. Their society's always been less that way.
You don't think it's because of gun
But overall,
no, it's people that make violence, not guns.
Yeah,
Guns
but
are
crime
pieces of
levels
metal.
are not necessarily lower in Europe, but gun deaths are much lower.
See, I think you've got probably the same percentage of crazy people in every culture. And the difference is it's a lot easier to kill someone with a gun.
They had guns
than with a
before.
knife.
They had guns when they banned. The only reason they banned them is they had one big crime where somebody, again, did the same thing. They locked a bunch of people in a room where the police couldn't come help, and they killed them.
This question is not going away. This hour went very fast. We will come back on this topic, I assure you. If you want to comment on the blog, it's easy to do. Just go to radioinsidescoop.com. It will be replayed. You can get a copy of the show. The debate will continue. I want to conclude with a ceremony at Virginia Tech.
It's almost overwhelming just seeing everyone come together. I mean, we've had the convocation earlier today, which was amazing.
Stuff like this doesn't happen here. This is a quiet community, a quiet county, and for something like this to happen and to be so big, it's really affected everybody. And I think this is something we're going to carry with us, obviously, for the rest of our lives.
Right now, the only thing I can do is to pray and to bring my best wish to their family.
I don't know, you just got to see everyone's spirit and just know that we will get through this and we will get back to normal one day.
All of us are part of this community, and this is a community.
With support coming from all over the nation and even other parts of the world, it is true that today we are all Hokies.
Hokies! 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 Hokies!
We are Virginia Tech. We are sad today, and we will be sad for quite a while. We are not moving on. We are embracing our mourning. We are Virginia Tech. We are strong enough to stand tall, tearlessly. We are brave enough to bend a cry, and sad enough to know we must laugh again. We are Virginia Tech. We do not understand this tragedy.
As I said, this is a debate that will continue. I want to encourage you to say what you want on the web at radioinsidescoop.com. A video of this clip will be available there as well. This is Mark Levine signing off.